No one on that highway noticed her at first. Cars passed at full speed, trucks roared like distant storms, and the heat pressed down on the asphalt so hard that the air itself seemed to tremble. It was the kind of road people crossed without thinking, the kind that belonged more to machines than to humans. And yet, right there on the shoulder, moving slowly as if each step demanded negotiation with pain, was a woman pulling a small, rusted cart. Her name was Helen Carter, and she was 32 years old. The cart was uneven, one wheel slightly bent, making it wobble every time it hit a crack in the road. Inside it were two children. A boy, Ethan, almost 7, thin arms wrapped tightly around his knees, and a girl, Lily, 4 years old, asleep despite the noise, her head resting against a folded jacket that once belonged to someone else. Helen's hands were blistered, her shoulders burned. Sweat soaked through the fabric of her faded shirt, clinging to her back. She hadn't eaten since early morning, and even then, it had been nothing more than half a piece of bread she had saved from the day before. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, but stopping was not an option. Stopping meant staying exactly where life had left her. A few miles ahead, a black SUV slowed down. Behind the wheel sat Daniel Moore, 41 years old, a man who had spent most of his adult life learning how to ignore discomfort. As a logistics company owner, his days were built on schedules, numbers, and decisions that rarely involved emotion. His car was quiet, insulated, cold, the kind of cold that protected you from the world. At first he planned to keep driving. He noticed the cart, then the children, then the way the woman leaned forward, pulling not just metal and weight, but exhaustion itself. Something tightened in his chest, sharp and unwelcome. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He told himself he had meetings to attend, calls to return, responsibilities waiting. But his foot eased off the accelerator anyway. He pulled over a few meters ahead and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He didn't know why he had stopped. He only knew that if he drove away, the image would follow him longer than he wanted to admit. When Helen reached the SUV, she froze. Her first instinct was fear, not the loud kind, but the quiet one that grows from experience. She straightened her posture, instinctively placing herself between the car and the children. Daniel stepped out slowly, careful not to startle her. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. The silence between them was heavy, thick with things neither of them knew how to say. "It's hot," he said, his voice low, almost unsure. "They must be thirsty." Helen hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the children, then back to him. She nodded once. Daniel handed her a bottle of cold water. She didn't drink it. She passed it directly to Ethan, who drank too fast and coughed, water spilling down his chin. Then another bottle went to Lily, who woke up confused but grateful, clutching it with both hands. Only after both children were done did Helen take a small sip herself. That was the moment Daniel noticed her hands shaking. He offered them a ride. Helen refused, not because she didn't need it, but because life had taught her to be careful with kindness that appeared too suddenly. Daniel didn't argue. He simply asked where they were going. "To the old town near Riverbend," she said. "If we make it before dark, there's a shelter that might have space." It was still over an hour away. Daniel looked at the cart again, then at the road, then at the children. He opened the trunk. The ride was quiet. Ethan stared out the window the entire time, watching the world blur past like something unreal. Lily fell asleep again, this time stretched across the seat, breathing softly. Helen sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, as if the slightest movement might break whatever fragile agreement had allowed this moment to exist. Daniel drove without music. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Halfway through the drive, without turning his head, he asked her what had happened. Helen didn't answer immediately. Then, in a voice so calm it almost sounded detached, she told him about the factory closure. About the apartment she couldn't afford anymore. About her husband, who had died in a construction accident 3 years earlier. About the way life doesn't collapse all at once, but piece by piece, until one day you look around and realize there's nothing left to hold on to. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He didn't say he understood, because he knew he didn't. When they reached Riverbend, the shelter was full. The woman at the front desk shook her head apologetically. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Helen nodded like she had expected nothing else. Daniel stood there, watching her shoulders slump just a little. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for him. He surprised himself by speaking before thinking. I live outside the city, he said. It's a quiet place, there's room just for a while. Helen turned to him slowly. She searched his face not for kindness, but for danger, for impatience, for conditions that hadn't been spoken out loud. What would you want in return? She asked. Nothing, Daniel replied. The word felt strange in his mouth. The house sat on the edge of a wide field, far from traffic and noise. It wasn't luxurious, but it was solid, clean, safe. The kind of place built for permanence. When they arrived, Lily ran inside first, her laughter echoing off the walls like something the house had been waiting for. Helen stood in the doorway, frozen. She had learned not to trust comfort. That night, the children slept in real beds for the first time in months. Helen sat on the edge of the mattress long after they had drifted off, listening to the sound of the wind outside, unsure whether this peace was temporary or dangerous. Daniel watched from the hallway and quietly closed the door. Days turned into weeks. Helen helped around the house at first, cooking, cleaning, organizing, as if usefulness were her way of earning the right to stay. Daniel tried to stop her, but she insisted. It was easier to move than to think. Ethan started school. Lily learned how to swim in the small pool behind the house, laughing every time she fell in. Slowly, something inside Helen began to soften. Not hope, not yet. But the constant tension that had lived in her chest began to loosen. Daniel noticed the changes, too. The house felt different. Fuller, louder, more alive than it had since his wife passed away 4 years earlier. He had grown used to emptiness, had mistaken it for peace. Now he realized it had been loneliness wearing a disguise. One evening, as Helen folded laundry, Daniel sat at the table watching the children draw. You don't have to stay forever, he said quietly. Helen looked up. I know, she replied. But neither of them believed it would be that simple. If you're still here reading this might be a good moment to pause and join the channel. Stories like this only exist because people choose to stay, listen, and be part of something bigger than a scroll. The accident happened on a quiet afternoon. Ethan had been told not to run near the pool. He knew the rule. He broke it anyway. The sound of water was different this time, heavier, wrong. By the time Helen reached the pool, Ethan was floating face down. The world collapsed into noise and motion. Daniel dove in without thinking, pulling the boy out, laying him on the ground, hands shaking as he remembered instructions he never thought he'd need. Helen screamed his name, over and over, her voice breaking apart with each repetition. Seconds stretched into lifetimes. When Ethan finally coughed, water spilling from his mouth, Helen collapsed to her knees, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. The ambulance arrived later. The doctor said they had been lucky, very lucky. That night Helen didn't sleep. She sat beside Ethan's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, realizing how close she had come to losing everything again. Daniel stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of something he had never planned but could no longer imagine living without. Months passed. Helen found work nearby, modest but stable. She started saving, talking about the future, about possibilities she had once stopped allowing herself to imagine. One morning, she told Daniel she had found a small apartment. He nodded. I figured you would, he said. The silence that followed was heavier than any before. On moving day, the children hugged Daniel tightly. Lily cried. Ethan tried not to. It was 0-0. Have you ever witnessed a scene on a lonely road that forced you to pull over and question everything you've ever built? Julian, a 46-year-old self-made millionaire, never imagined that a routine drive through the sweltering outskirts of Atlanta would lead him to the most pivotal crossroad of his life. Amidst the shimmering heat waves rising from the asphalt, a woman was pushing a rusted, skeletal grocery cart with 2 small children huddled inside, their skin flushed under the relentless, unforgiving glare of the southern sun. The road 28. Her legs were visibly trembling with every agonizing step, yet she pressed on with a quiet, bone-deep ferocity that was haunting to behold. Julian slammed on his brakes, feeling something fundamental fracture within his chest as he watched her struggle. Stay with us until the very end to discover how a single, spontaneous act of empathy managed to rewrite the destiny of 4 souls forever. The charcoal SUV glided silently along the Georgia highway music, while Julian mentally checked off the high-stakes meetings and property acquisitions filling his calendar. 0:55. It was a humid Wednesday afternoon, music, and the sky felt like a heavy, suffocating blanket of heat. He was returning from a grueling negotiation in the city, and his only craving was the sterile silence of his massive estate. The climate control inside the vehicle was humming at peak efficiency, creating a pristine, artificial bubble of luxury that completely severed him from the brutal reality of the world outside his glass windows. 01:17. He could never have guessed that this mundane, everyday commute would become the precise moment his internal compass was recalibrated. Suddenly, a flicker of movement in the hazy distance caught his eye. A small, frail figure was inching along the narrow shoulder of the road just before the pavement gave way to the red clay dust of the rural tracks. Julian squinted through his polarized sunglasses, trying to make sense of the silhouette. 1:41. What he saw made his knuckles turn white against the premium leather of the steering wheel. A woman was straining against a makeshift transport, not a stroller, but a discarded metal shopping cart. Inside, there were no groceries, no supplies, and no tools. There were 2 children, 2 tiny, fragile beings clinging to the oxidized wire mesh, while their mother pushed them with a physical intensity that seemed to defy the laws of human endurance. 02:07. Julian's heart thundered against his ribs. Music. The image was so jarring, so visceral, that his foot hit the brake pedal by sheer music instinct. The heavy vehicle slowed as Julian watched in stunned disbelief. The woman wore a faded, threadbare sundress, bleached of its color by years of sun and laundry. Her copper hair was matted with sweat against her neck, and her face was a mask of salt and grime, tears of exertion carving streaks through the dust on her cheeks. 02:34 music. She was leaning her entire body weight into the cart, her spine curved like a bow as she fought for every inch of ground. The children inside looked drained, their spirits dampened by the humidity. The older girl, perhaps 8 years old, held her younger brother's head in her lap, shielding his eyes from the glare with her small, shaking hand. The little boy, barely 5, had his eyes closed, his breathing heavy as he succumbed to the lethargy of the afternoon heat. 02:59. Julian felt a sharp, burning constriction in his throat. How many miles had they traveled in this indignity? How many times had this mother performed this grueling pilgrimage just to survive? These questions swarmed his mind like a hornet's nest as he pulled the SUV onto the gravel. He couldn't just drive past. His conscience, long buried under layers of corporate coldness, wouldn't allow it. 03:22. He cut the engine and stepped out. The heat hit him like a physical blow the moment the door opened. It was one thing to see the sun from behind tinted glass. It was another to feel it searing your skin, realizing there was no refuge for those on foot. He walked toward them, his leather shoes crunching on the debris. The woman looked up, her head snapping toward him at the sound of his approach. In her eyes, Julian saw a look he recognized instantly. 03:49. It was a jagged edge of suspicion, honed by a lifetime of disappointment. It was the gaze of someone who had learned the hard way that strangers usually bring trouble, not help. Julian raised his palms in a peaceful, open gesture, desperately wanting to signal that he wasn't a threat. "Excuse me, music ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to a gentle, steady tone. "I saw you from the road. You've come a long way. Please let me help." The woman stopped, her chest heaving as she gasped for air. 04:16. She wiped the stinging sweat from her brow with the back of a bruised hand, eyeing him with deep-seated caution. "We're all right, sir, thank you," she replied, her voice raspy and thin but carrying a stubborn pride. "We don't have much further to go." Julian looked at the endless stretch of red dirt road ahead. He knew this county music. It was a labyrinth of isolated trailer parks and forgotten farms. A 4:38. The little further she spoke of was likely several more miles under a sun that showed no mercy. Please, Julian insisted, his voice softening with genuine concern. At least take some water. I have plenty in the back. He didn't wait for her to music refuse. He turned back to the SUV and pulled 3 ice-cold bottles from the refrigerated console, a feature he had never truly appreciated until this very second. Then 05:01. He walked back and offered them to her. The woman hesitated, her fingers twitching, but the sight of the condensation on the bottles broke her resolve. She took one, cracked the seal, and immediately pressed it to the little boy's lips. "Drink slow, Caleb," she whispered with a tenderness that brought tears to Julian's eyes. Music. The boy drank with a desperate intensity, the cold water reviving his parched throat. 05:23. She then handed the second bottle to the girl, Lily, who took a long, shaky sip before nodding her gratitude. Only after her children had been tended to did the woman allow herself a single, measured swallow. That selfless act told Julian everything he needed to know about her character. She was a mother who lived and died for her children, a woman who would walk through fire if it meant they could stay in the shade. "I'm Julian," he said, feeling the need to ground the encounter in a human connection. 05:51. "What is your name?" The woman took a moment to study his face again. "Elena," she finally said, "and these are my world, Lily and Caleb." Music. Her voice softened as she spoke their names, as if the mere sound of them provided the fuel she needed to keep her heart beating. Julian crouched down to eye level with the children. 06:13. Lily watched him with wide, intelligent eyes, while Caleb hid his face against her shoulder. "It's nice to meet you, Lily, Caleb," he said with a warm, easy smile. "It's a bit too hot for a walk today, isn't it?" Lily gave a tiny, shy nod. Julian stood up and looked at Elena with a firm, unyielding determination. "Listen, Elena, I can't let you continue like this. The heat index is dangerous. 06:36. Please, let me drive you home. The kids shouldn't have to endure this a minute longer." Elena shook her head, her hand tightening on the handle of the cart. "I don't want to be a bother, sir. We're used to the walk." But her voice was failing her, lacking the conviction of her words. Julian saw her knees buckle slightly, a tremor of pure exhaustion running through her frame. 06:57. "It's no trouble at all, music," he countered, maintaining his warmth but adding a touch of command. "In fact, I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if I left you out here. Come on, get in. I can fit the cart in the trunk." Elena searched his eyes, looking for any hint of a hidden agenda or malice. She found only a deep, aching sincerity, and a man who looked like he was rediscovering his own humanity. 11:21. After a silence that felt like it spanned an eternity, she slowly nodded. Julian didn't realize then that this simple choice, to stop, to care, to intervene, would be the catalyst for a transformation that would dwarf all his professional achievements. He took hold of the grocery cart and lifted it into the back of his SUV. It was heavier than it looked, weighted down by the invisible burden of a family's struggle and the physical toll of their daily survival. 07:50. He secured the cart so it wouldn't shift music and then opened the heavy rear doors of the luxury vehicle. "Please climb in, make yourselves at home," he said, gesturing to the spacious, leather-clad interior. Elena helped Caleb inside, then Lily, and finally she slid onto the seat with a sigh that seemed to release years of tension. Julian closed the door with a soft thud and climbed into the driver's seat. 17. He started the engine, and the climate control roared back to life, flooding the cabin with a crisp, rejuvenating breeze. Music. What happened next caught Julian completely off guard. Caleb let out a tiny, high-pitched gasp of music pure joy. "Mommy, it's like winter," the boy whispered, his eyes widening as he held his small, dirt-streaked hands in front of the vents. 8:45. Lily let out a soft, melodic laugh, a sound so pure it felt like a healing balm. "It's amazing. It feels like we're inside a cloud," she said, leaning her head back against the plush headrest. Julian looked in the rearview mirror and felt a sharp, painful crack in his heart. The children were mesmerized, completely enthralled by something he considered a basic right, a mundane utility he never spent a second thought on. 9:12. He had never once stopped to consider that air conditioning could be a miracle, a profound luxury that someone might experience for the first time in their lives. But there they were, two innocent souls laughing and playing with the cold air as if it were the most magical gift they had ever received. "You've never been in a car with AC before?" he asked softly, though the answer was written in their faces. 9:35, music. Elena shook her head, watching her children with a heart-breaking blend of joy and sorrow. "No, sir, we haven't had a vehicle in a very long time. This is more than they've ever known." Her voice was thick with emotion. Caleb was pressing his cheeks against the leather, giggling as the air ruffled his hair. 9:56. Lily was doing the same, whispering about how frozen at music everything felt. Julian had to swallow hard against the lump forming in his throat. He put the car in gear and began to drive slowly down the dirt path Elena pointed out. The road became increasingly treacherous as they went deeper into the woods, the ruts in the clay becoming deeper and the trees more overgrown. 18. "We're just up ahead, sir, where the trees thin out," music, Elena explained, pointing toward a clearing. Julian observed the landscape. Ramshackle houses, rusted trailers, and gardens of weeds and junk. It was a reality that existed only 15 minutes from his gated community. Yet it was a world he had successfully ignored for decades. 10:42. As he drove, Caleb began to pepper him with questions with the innocent, uninhibited curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Is this your spaceship?" he asked in awe. "It's just a car, buddy," music, Julian replied, smiling. "But you can call it a spaceship if you want." "Do you have a castle?" the boy continued. Elena shushed him gently. "Caleb, don't be rude." "I'm sorry, sir. He doesn't know." Julian interrupted her with a soft laugh. 11:07. "It's fine, Elena. I like the questions." He caught Lily's eye in the mirror. Music. "And yes, Caleb, I have a big house. It's on a farm with lots of open space and animals." Lily's eyes sparked with life. "Animals?" Music. "Like what?" Julian thought for a second. "I have a few horses, some goats, and a big lazy dog named Bear." 11:31. The children exchanged looks of pure wonder. To them, Julian's life sounded like a fairy tale from a book they'd never owned. Eleanor watched him closely, seeing how her children were coming alive in the presence of this stranger. There was something different about him, something authentic. He didn't look at them with the pity that stings or the superiority that demeans. He looked at them with a genuine, aching interest. 11:58. "Turn left here, sir," Eleanor directed after a few more minutes. "It's that one, the one with the porch that's leaning." Julian followed her lead and stopped the SUV in front of a very humble structure. The walls were weathered wood, the roof was patched with mismatched shingles, and the porch was indeed sagging under its own weight. But there were flower boxes filled with bright petunias, a clear sign of a woman trying to keep beauty alive in the midst of poverty. 12:23. It was small, incredibly fragile, but it was cared for. Julian stepped out and retrieved the grocery cart from the back. He set it on the ground with a soft metallic rattle. Eleanor approached him with her children's hands firmly in hers. "Mr. Julian, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. 12:47. "Truly, may God bless you for your kindness today." Julian shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone should have done." Music. But in his heart, he knew that wasn't true. How many cars had passed them by? How many people had looked at the grocery cart and looked away? Lily stepped forward timidly. 12. "Thank you for the winter air," she said softly. Those simple words hit Julian harder than any corporate loss he'd ever suffered. Caleb also stepped up music and reached out his hand. Julian knelt down and shook it with a gravity that suggested he was finalizing the most important contract of his career. "It was an honor to meet you, champ," he said, his smile reaching his eyes. 13:33. Elena was about to say her final goodbye when Julian felt a powerful, undeniable pull from within, a voice telling him that he couldn't just walk away. Something told him this family needed more than a ride, and he needed to know the rest of their story. Julian looked at the fragile house, and then back at Elena, who was holding her children close as if they were the only riches she possessed. 1359. Elena. Music, he began softly. Would you mind if I stayed for a moment? I'd really like to hear more about your family. Elena looked at him, startled. It wasn't normal for someone like him, Music, a man of obvious wealth and status, to want to linger in a place like this. But there was a safety in his presence, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long, long time. 1427. Of course, Mr. Julian, she replied after a brief hesitation. Please come in. I don't have much to offer, but I can make some iced tea. Julian accepted with a grateful smile. They entered the small home, which consisted of only 3 tiny rooms. One was a combined kitchen and living area, and the other 2 were music-cramped bedrooms. The floorboards creaked under their weight, but the air smelled of lemon polish and laundry soap. 1452. The furniture was mismatched and worn, yet the space was filled with love. There were handmade curtains on the windows and dozens of the children's drawings taped to the fridge. Eleanor asked Lily and Caleb to go play in the backyard while she prepared the tea. Julian sat on a rickety wooden chair, Music, at a small scarred table. 1515. He noticed every detail of this home built on a foundation of grit and dignity. Elena pulled a jar of sun-brewed tea from the counter, Music, and poured 2 glasses. It's not much, sir, she said with a hint of embarrassment. But it's cold. Julian shook his head. It's perfect, Elena. Please sit. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the crickets and the distant laughter of the kids. 16's eyes. Have you been on your own here for long? Julian asked gently. Music. Elena nodded slowly. 3 years now since I lost Thomas. Her voice caught on her husband's name. Julian saw the grief that still lived in the shadows of her eyes. I'm so sorry, he said with profound sincerity. If you don't mind me asking, what happened? 1625. Elena looked down at her glass, her thumb tracing the rim. For a moment it seemed she wouldn't speak, but then the words began to flow in a quiet, steady stream. Thomas worked in construction. He was a good man, a provider. He always said he'd build us a real house one day. She paused, taking a shaky breath. 1647. There was an accident on a site in the city, a collapse. He didn't stand a chance. Music. The tears finally began to fall silently down her face. He was only 30. We didn't have insurance, no savings, just this house his grandfather left him. Julian felt a heavy weight in his chest. He imagined this woman receiving that news, left entirely alone with 2 toddlers and no safety net. 1716. I am truly sorry, Elena, he said, his voice thick. He wanted to reach out and offer comfort, but he stayed back, honoring her strength. Elena wiped her eyes. Since then, I've done whatever I can, she continued, her voice gaining a hard, resilient edge. I clean houses, I pick fruit when it's in season, I do laundry for the folks in town. 1742. Sometimes the jobs are far, and I have to take the kids with me. She looked toward the window, Music, where Lily and Caleb were playing with a ball of yarn. My neighbor used to help Music, but she's gone now. So the grocery cart became our way of getting around. It's better than carrying them both on my back. 1803, Music. Julian listened, his heart breaking more with every word. Now he understood the grocery cart. And today, Music, he asked, where were you coming from? Eleanor sighed. I was working a shift at the peach orchard about 5 miles away. They paid me a few dollars under the table, Music. It's not much, but it buys bread and milk. 18 to 29, 5 miles. Pushing a metal cart with 50 pounds of children inside, in 100-degree weather. Julian felt a surge of anger at a world that allowed this. And what do you make for a day like that? Elena hesitated. If I work 8 hours, maybe $40 on a good day. Julian did the math in his head. 1858. That was less than he spent on a single lunch at his favorite bistro. It was barbaric. Elena, he said, looking her directly in the eyes, you are the strongest person I have ever met. Music. To raise these children with this much love, with this much dignity, that is an incredible feat. Eleanor smiled sadly. I'm not strong, sir. I'm just a mother. 24. They are my heart. They're all I have left of Thomas. As long as I can breathe, I will fight to give them something better. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight of devotion that made Julian realize how empty his own life had been. They finished their tea in a heavy, thoughtful silence as the sun began to dip, painting the Georgia pines in hues of gold and amber. 1951. Julian knew he had to leave, but he also knew he couldn't. He couldn't go back to his hollow mansion and forget the winter air or the grocery cart. A plan was taking shape in his mind, a plan that would either be the craziest thing he'd ever done or the only thing that actually mattered. Julian stood up and walked to the door. 2011. He watched Lily and Caleb. They were good kids, polite and imaginative despite having nothing. He turned back to Eleanor, who was watching him with a mixture of curiosity and a flickering of hope she was trying to suppress. Elena, Julian said, his voice echoing with a new, profound purpose. 2035. What I'm about to say might sound strange, or even impulsive, but I need you to know I mean it with every fiber of my being. Eleanor stood up, her hands twisting in her dress. What is it, sir? Julian took a deep breath. I have a very large estate. It has more rooms than I can count, and it's been silent for 5 years. I lost my wife to illness, and since then, I've been living in a museum of my own making. Wanak. He paused, music choosing his words with care. I need someone to help me turn that house back into a home. I don't want a staff that clocks out at 5. I want a family that lives there, that breathes life into those walls. Eleanor stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Julian continued. I want you, Lily and Caleb, to come and live with me at the estate. 21:24. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Tears of confusion and shock began to well in her eyes. Sir, she finally whispered, her voice cracking. Are you serious? Julian nodded firmly. Completely. 21:47. You would manage the household affairs, nothing heavy, just keeping things running. The kids would go to the best school in the district. They'd have their own rooms, healthy food, and a massive backyard to play in. You'd have a salary, security, and a future. He stepped closer. I know we just met, but when I saw you on that road, I felt something I haven't felt in years, a reason to be better. 22:18. Life has given me more than I could ever spend, Elena, and I think it's time I shared that with people who actually deserve it. Elena began to sob, her face in her hands. Her entire body was shaking with the force of her release. It can't be true, she choked out through the tears. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Julian moved closer and placed a gentle, steadying hand on her shoulder. In 22:45. It is true, Elena. As true as the road where I found you. It wasn't a coincidence. I believe we were meant to cross paths. Elena looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. But Mr. Julian, music, you don't know me. How can you trust us? What if we aren't what you think? Julian smiled with a profound, quiet wisdom. They're on 23:11. I saw you give them the water first. I saw the way they look at you. Music. I saw the petunias on your porch. That tells me everything I need to know. He stepped back to give her space. You aren't doing me a favor, Elena. I'm asking for your help. That house is dying of loneliness. It needs the sound of children running through the halls. 23:35. I need to remember that life music is about more than balance sheets and empty rooms. Elena sank into her chair, overwhelmed. But sir, I have nothing to give you. I can't pay rent, I can't. Julian cut her off. 23:57. I don't want your money. You'll have everything you need. I just want those kids to be kids, and I want you to have the chance to breathe without wondering where the next meal is coming from. Elena closed her eyes, more tears falling. She thought of Thomas, of how he would have wept with relief. 24:23, music. She thought of the miles she'd walked, the hunger she'd hidden, the sheer, crushing weight of being a widow with no hope. This was a door opening when she thought every exit had been boarded up. She began. Her voice a mere thread of sound. I don't know what to say, Mr. Julian. It's too much. 24:49. Julian knelt down in front of her. Just say yes, Elena. Tell your children they have a home. Tell yourself that you've fought long enough and it's okay to let someone help you. Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw only kindness, only truth. There was no catch, no dark motive. It was just a man who had finally found a way to use his success for something that mattered. 5:14. She opened her mouth, and the word came out as a sacred whisper. Yes, yes, Mr. Julian. We'll come. For my children. I accept. Julian felt an immense, soaring joy fill his heart. He stood up and beamed at her. You won't regret it, Elena. I promise. They walked out together to the yard where Lily and Caleb were still playing. 25:40. Kids, come here, Elena called, her voice bright with a new, vibrant energy. The children ran to her. Elena knelt and gathered them into a fierce embrace. Mr. Julian has invited us to live at his big house. We're going to have a real home. You're going to a new school. Lily's face lit up like a star. Really, Mommy? Caleb was already jumping. 26:02. Can I see the dog? Can I see Bear? Julian watched them, grinning, having no idea that this family he was rescuing was actually the one rescuing him from a lifetime of isolation. If you find this story as moving as I do, please take a second to subscribe to our channel. We love sharing these journeys of the human spirit with you, and hearing your thoughts in the comments helps us build a community of kindness. 6:28. 3 days later, Julian's SUV was winding up the long, tree-lined driveway of his estate. In the back seat, Lily and Caleb were pressed against the windows, their mouths hanging open in pure, unadulterated awe. Elena sat in the front, music, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing with a mixture of nerves and wonder. 26:59. They had so little to bring, just a few bags of clothes, a couple of weathered toys, and the framed photo of Thomas that Eleanor held against her chest like a talisman. Music. Julian had told them not to worry about furniture or supplies. He had already spent the last 48 hours making sure the house was ready for them. 27:19. As they rounded the final bend, music, the full scale of the property was revealed. Lily let out a soft, breathless gasp. Mommy, look! Music. The girl pointed to the rolling green lawns, the flower gardens that looked like a painting, and the massive oak trees that had stood for centuries. It was a world of vibrant colour, so different from the grey dust of their old life. 27:41. Caleb was practically vibrating with excitement. Is this all yours? He whispered. Julian caught his eye in the mirror. It belongs to all of us now, Caleb, he said with a warm, steady voice. The main house came into view, a stunning white-columned manor music that looked both grand and inviting. It had a wide wraparound porch with comfortable rockers and a massive front door. 28:06. It was beautiful, but for the first time in years, it didn't look like a cold monument. It looked like a home. Julian parked the car. Before he could even get out, the kids had scrambled out of the back and were running toward the grass, laughing and spinning until they fell down in the soft, cool clover. 28:27. Elena watched them from the passenger seat, tears blurring her vision. I still feel like I'm going to wake up, she murmured. Julian walked around and opened her door. Music. It's real, Elena. Welcome home. She stepped out slowly, her feet touching the smooth stone of the driveway. She looked around, her chest expanding with a breath of air that didn't feel heavy. 28:52. She had never imagined such beauty could be hers. Julian gathered their bags and led them toward the house. Come on, let me show you your rooms, he called to the kids. Lily and Caleb came running back, their faces flushed with happiness, their clothes already smelling like fresh-cut grass. Music. They entered the foyer and Elena had to stop to catch her breath. 29:19. Music. The entryway was magnificent, with high ceilings and a sweeping staircase. There were warm rugs on the hardwood floors and sunlight streaming through the stained glass. It was a space that had been waiting for the sound of footsteps. Julian led them down a wide hallway. 29:40. Here's the kitchen, he said, pushing open the double doors. It was massive with professional appliances, music, a walk-in pantry, and a huge oak table in the center. Eleanor walked to the table and ran her hand over the wood, imagining the meals they would share here. She had never seen so much space dedicated to the simple act of feeding a family. 30:03. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling. Julian continued the tour, showing them the library, the sunroom, and the grand living area. Each room was more incredible than the last, but it was the bedrooms that mattered most. Finally, they reached a set of doors. Julian opened them with a flourish. "This is for you, Lily and Caleb." Under 26. The room was enormous, divided into 2 sections with beautiful, comfortable beds, new linens, and shelves waiting to be filled. Music. Large windows overlooked the garden and the pool in the distance. Lily ran in and threw herself onto one of the beds, sinking into the soft duvet. The nearest 48. "It's like a marshmallow, Mommy." Caleb followed suit, bouncing on the other bed. "I have my own lamp! Look!" The 2 of them started giggling, a sound that echoed through the house and seemed to drive out years of shadows. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, weeping with the sheer, overwhelming relief of it. Julian led her to the next room, her own suite. 31:16. It was a sanctuary of soft colors, a king-sized bed, and a private bath with a deep soaking tub. The air was scented with lavender. "This is too much, Mr. Julian," Elena said, her voice failing. "I don't deserve this." Julian shook his head. "Everyone deserves a place where they feel safe. Everyone deserves to sleep without fear." 31:42. He set her bags on the bed. "Take your time. Get settled. Later we'll head into town and get the kids whatever they need. Clothes, books, gear for school, whatever they want." Elena looked at him with a gratitude so deep it was beyond words. "Thank you for everything." Julian smiled. 32:03. "Just seeing them smile is all the thanks I need." After they had unpacked, Julian took them on a tour of the grounds. He led them to the stables where 3 horses poked their heads out to greet them. Caleb let out a shriek of delight. 32:25. "Can I ride one?" Julian laughed. "Soon, Caleb, but first you have to learn how to talk to them. I'll teach you both." They walked to the garden, and Julian showed them the vegetable patches and the fruit trees. He let them pick fresh apples right off the branch. Lily and Caleb bit into the fruit, the juice running down their chins as they laughed. 32:49. "You can eat whatever you find," Julian told them. Finally, they reached the pool. It was a sprawling oasis of blue water shimmering under the sun. The kids looked at it with a mix of wonder and hesitation. They had never seen a private pool before. "Can we go in?" Lily asked shyly. 33:12. "As soon as we get you some swimsuits," Julian promised. "And I'll teach you to swim. It's an important skill for a farm kid, right?" The children nodded, their faces glowing. Eleanor watched from the shade of the porch, realizing that her life had been split into 2 halves. The long walk in the sun and the rest of her life here. 33:37. That evening, they ate dinner together at the big oak table. Julian had ordered a feast from the best place in town. The children ate until they were full, a luxury they hadn't known in years. As they cleared the table, Eleanor looked at Julian and knew that her husband would have been proud of the choice she made. 34 Zolun. The following weeks were a blur of new experiences. Julian took a leave of absence from his firms to help them adjust. Every morning began with a shared breakfast and a plan. Elena took over the management of the house, but she quickly found that with the modern appliances and Julian's help, it was a joy rather than a chore. 34:25. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't exhausted. She had time to read to her children, time to walk in the garden, and time to breathe. Julian spent hours with Lily and Caleb. He bought them bicycles and taught them to ride on the paved paths. He took them to the library and let them pick out as many books as they could carry. 34:46. One afternoon, he took them back to the stables for their first real riding lesson. Lily was nervous, but Julian helped her onto a gentle mare named Willow. He walked beside her, his hand on the saddle. "I've got you, Lily. You're doing great." Slowly the girl's fear evaporated into a wide, beaming smile. Caleb was next, and he took to it like he was born for the saddle. 35:39. During those weeks, Julian felt a profound shift within himself. He had started this as an act of charity, but he realized music, it was his own soul that was being repaired. The sound of children's laughter was the medicine he didn't know he needed. 35:55. As we reach the end of this story, we want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where a stranger changed your life? Or where you had the chance to change someone else's? Our community is built on these shared experiences of hope and humanity. Please subscribe to stay part of our journey and share your own stories in the comments below. Let's remember that no matter how hot the road gets, there is always a chance for a new beginning. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. You didn't save us, she finally said. You gave us space to save ourselves. Daniel watched them drive away, the house growing quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone or something you've lived through, consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts below. This space is built on stories like yours, stories of loss, kindness, and the moments that change everything without warning.